everyone. This is Rita Matuzic, and you are listening to the Real Talk, Real Results podcast, the show that doesn't sugarcoat B2B marketers' everyday challenges and discusses actionable, realistic solutions. Today, we're discussing demand creation and demand capture for B2B marketing strategy. Joining me for the second time on our show is Ram Sahu, CEO of UnboundB2B. Ram, can you give our audience a little refresher on your background and expertise?
Thanks for having me, Rita, and so nice to meet you again. My background, I currently work as CEO of UnboundB2B. My background has been a technology sales professional before starting a business, and now last 10 years or so, I will operate as a go-to-market expert, helping B2B marketers achieve their pipeline goals.
Which means you are the perfect person to talk to us about our topic today. So first question, how do you break down the key differences between demand creation and demand capture, and how do they fit into an effective B2B marketing strategy?
I think both demand creation and demand capture are two different functions of marketing. And both require a different strategy, may not be skill set, but a different strategy altogether. So a recent study that I read from the B2B Institute, it was published somewhere last year. And then I do, engage with a lot of our customers, understanding how they are, what are the current focuses in B2B marketing, whether they focus more on demand creation and demand capture. But the general analysis is that 95% of your target audience is not into the buying cycle. So, they may not be ready for next 9 to 18 months, depending on their buying cycle, depending on their budget cycle, etc. So you're only left with the 5% demand capture to capture demand, right? So, and then the 5% is really a small audience, right? Demand capture strategy would be, you use, creative and paid media strategies in order to acquire leads and traffic through search engines and social media, where people are showing clear high intent using certain keywords, and then you direct them to your website, they find your solution, you capture that lead. That's a very typical demand capture strategy, but that's limited. And when you start competing over there, you're basically just a price comparison in many cases. Like, for example, I'll give you an example. So when a customer inquires through our website, right, they definitely have a need. So there is a demand, right? So it's a perfect opportunity to capture that demand for us. However, when they do inquire with us, a normal human being, they would inquire with at least 3 to 4 different vendors, right? So that means you're immediately competing with 4 or 5 others that are your lookalike or have similar services or have overlapping services like yours or similar solutions. So what that means is you need to be aware of your marketplace, need to be aware of your competition, and need to be aware of your ICP and who they would choose as your competition. And that's where demand capture strategy becomes very complex, because it is how fast can you get to the prospect and provide solution for their problem. And then post that, you're also into a price comparison, because a lot of them out there are going to be a lookalike, right? Unless you are SpaceX, which is pretty unique. There's not a lot of space companies operating in space. Unless you have a solution that unique, you're basically competing, right? And whereas so demand capture is important. It helps with your short-term goals and helps you build quick pipeline. But the certainty of that will depend on how efficient your marketing team, your GTM team, or your GTM agency is. Whereas demand creation is a larger pool, 95%, right? And I actually advocate a lot for demand creation, because same study showed that, same study from the B2B Institute showed that when 95% of the buyers, when they are in the buying cycle or when they're ready to make a purchase, they generally buy from a known brand. 80% of them generally buy from a known brand. So, well, if that is true, you should actually be creating brand awareness within your target audience, right? Because if you that basically means that you're building a long-term pipeline for you, which could be very which is valuable, but it also delivers a consistent result month over month, There is a cycle that you need to go through, which is whatever 3, 6, 9 month cycle. But once you are there, you have a consistent result that is delivered, that demand creation campaigns can deliver to you. And then again, demand creation can be broken down into different parts. So first one is obviously your brand positioning, your messaging and the creatives that you create for your customer, for your target audience, and then breaking down into channels, like whether are you going to use a programmatic advertising strategy, or a LinkedIn promotion strategy, or promoting your brand through uh, other platforms like Reddit, G2 Crowd, Trust Radius, etc., where your audience is currently visiting, and and then converting these engagements or the brand awareness that you're creating into a top of the funnel lead, which becomes like your own community, from where you have a separate strategy. Could be a email automation, could be a SDR sequence, or anything depending on the company size and the marketing team size. You would then further nurture them over a period of 6 to 12 months, so 6 to 12 weeks, before qualifying them as a sales qualified lead on certain parameters. So while I'm a big advocate of demand creation, simply because it can derive long-term result, consistent result, demand capture is also important to deliver short-term results. It all depends on where the marketer is. Demand capture generally requires, in terms of proportion, it requires more budget. So budget is also a big factor, whether you focus on demand creation or demand capture. But I think companies should focus on both.
Yes. And I love that you mentioned budget. How do you think B2B marketers should split their budgets between demand creation and demand capture? And do you think that this can vary, based on company size or industry or any other, factor around these companies?
Again, it depends on where you are in your marketing journey, right? So if you want a straightforward answer, it's 60-40. 60% demand creation and 40% on demand capturing. But again, it would vary depending on how big is your company, what is your total addressable market, and what is the volume of search traffic that you're looking to capture, and what is the size of your total size of the total number of accounts that you're addressing, total addressable market, and then budget, right? So if you don't have the budget to go after all that, I recommend come back to an ABM strategy where it perfectly fits. So you identify just enough number of companies that you can educate, interact, and convert them into leads and opportunities for you with that budget, right? So so that your ad budget is not spread thin, or your marketing budget is not spreading thin. But to answer your question, if you're just starting out, you have enough budget, no budget problem, it's 60-40. But marketing teams that are successful and have done this enough, or you can go back to a GTM agency like us, who have the data, which is industry level data, to provide you an idea or information or a benchmark on return on ad spend, right? ROAS, right? So that is the right way to actually measure that. If my ROAS is say 10x on, say, bottom of the funnel strategy, which is demand capture, so I might spend X amount here, but my ROAS in demand creation strategy is X over a period of 12 months and 44%, 36 months. That'll give you an idea of how much you want to spend. But if you don't want to get into that analytics, which I recommend everybody should analyze their data before making decisions. The industry standard is 60-40, 60% creation, demand creation, and 40% demand capturing. By the way, I should also say that a lot of times field marketing budgets are seen separately, because they sometimes operate with sales and sometimes operate with marketing, and their reporting is like a dotted line to both. A CRO solves that problem, but as of today, I think field marketing is a demand creation strategy versus a demand generation, because it gives you more visibility, helps you build your brand, helps you create a community. It gets your brand out there. With the field marketing strategy, I think it should be part of demand creation and shouldn't be treated separately. I think it's a
Yeah.
big part of B2B marketing strategy, and there should be some dedicated focus there.
Yes. I want to come back to something you said. You mentioned ROAS, return on ad spend. And that's one metric that, is important to look at. But what are other metrics that can determine success as well as help marketers identify that success when they're looking at demand creation and demand capture and how they want to report to, their manager or to senior marketers or other executives in the team?
Let's talk about demand creation first, right? So with demand creation, as I said, you will see long-term ROI, consistent ROI. But again, it's not that it's not like you just turn on an engine and then leave it off, right? You have to learn from your data, iterate your campaign, make changes to your creatives, bring new fresh assets, bring in new ad copies, etc., in order to keep your content fresh and keep your prospects engaged. Long-term strategy, that I believe is demand creation and delivers a higher ROI. I'll speak to that a little bit. When you're basically working on demand creation strategy, your measuring metrics should be engagement and not leads, right? Today, what I see is a customer who has, say, a $50,000 budget has a expectation of number of leads that they would want, from the campaign. Now, that is not necessarily driving success for them. Number of leads is by no means measure of success. I think what is success is basically, in demand creation is making sure, your content, you're investing into content, right? That's one. And then the content performance. And then you have to look at channel and channel wise performance. But ultimately the measurement should be, the engagement. How many accounts in your ICP is, if you feel are engaged, how many contacts are showing high engagement scores, how many accounts are showing higher intent scores, etc. So those are the areas that you need to focus on, and then you need to tie that into a long-term strategy, which is when and where they inquire or they become a sales qualified opportunity or come into the sales pipeline. You have to backtrack and use an attribution model, backtrack and understand where and when these accounts have been educated, and then understand which channel performed better. So in short term, yes, measurement would be engagement. And if by chance you have more leads come through that, which is great. But I don't see more leads is equal to better ROI as a benchmark. And with demand capture, right? I mean, there are, as I said, you can understand from your ROAS, return on ad spend, what number of leads, and then from there, if you figured out leads to sales qualified opportunity to your average selling price and close rate, it's an easy math to do in order to understand what kind of ROI you can expect from X amount of budget. But again, it's very unpredictable sometimes, because typically when you are competing in say for a certain keyword on Google or on social media, there's if there are other bidders at the same time during the same phase when you are bidding, it could become expensive and all your calculation could become. I think demand capture, measuring success for demand capture is the ROI. It's not number of leads. It's not number of sales qualified leads. It's not number of meetings. All of that does matter, because if you do not have activities in sales, that means your sales is not working. I mean, what matters most and what you should measure is ROI. If you're getting an ROI, and then if there is, the journey is always like up, stock market graph, it keeps going up and down, but there needs to be activities there, right? So and then ROI, I think you can actually project that with your return on ad spend strategy that you've already built, and if you can tie that to that would be great. Now the interesting part is, since we're talking about measuring both of them, what you would find is companies who are working on demand creation strategy while leveraging demand capture, which is paid media strategy, see a 70% higher return in like 12 to 24-month period time. So your speed to market is really high. So somebody who's getting ready from demand capture to from being not in the market to in market is educated about you and is getting and you're also capturing them at the same time. I think that's the right strategy. And then this also aligns back to what I said earlier, right? 60/40. So you have 60% budget for demand creation and 40 for demand capturing. Because if you have that, then you could expect higher ROI overall instead of focusing only on just one strategy.
Something you said a little bit earlier about the evolution of, I would say, kind of from traditional marketing of leads, more MQLs, more SQLs, to looking at engagements or just looking at different ways that we define and determine success. It makes me think that we are redefining the concept of what it means to be qualified. So, what do you think B2B marketers who are adapting these strategies should consider when they think about the concept of a qualified lead?
A concept of a qualified lead, traditionally has been banned criteria and, willing to take a demo and all of that, right? I do not believe that. I believe a prospect willing to engage in a conversation in today's day and time is the most valuable thing that people don't have, right, at our disposal today. And we didn't have so much of technology, connected world, etc. It should have made our life easier. In fact, we don't have enough time like we used to have 20 years ago.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just a general feeling. I'm saying there's no data to support that. I mean, at least I don't have the data to support that, but it's a general feeling. But what I mean is, time is the most valuable asset today. And why would somebody spend their time with you if they were not interested, right? So if somebody is willing to engage and, and connecting with your SDR team or account management team or AEs or SDs or whatever kind of setup that you have, that's a sales qualified lead because you are interacting with somebody who is within your ICP, matches your target persona, is one of the buyers or influencer. That's more than enough. Now you just need to figure out how does your solution match with their need or their challenge.
And also, how can you generate more engagement and prepare people to be ready to speak to you, right?
The reason why I said that lead is not a criteria is because lead is a measuring criteria is because most B2B companies are working on an account-based marketing strategy, right? If not, they still have a target account list that is drawn from their ICP, right? Now, let's just say a company which has a target account list of say 500 accounts or maybe 200 accounts. We'll take 200 accounts as an example here, and the target accounts are basically mid to large enterprises. Now, in the best scenario, depending on the solution that you are selling, you would probably have 500 to 5,000 buyers in there, depending on the solution, right? So if your solution is very exclusive, which is for HR folks only, then your audience is limited. If if your solution focuses on say information technology at a larger company, your audience will be slightly bigger than the HR audience. But if it focuses only on say IT security, then it becomes smaller again. So my point is, you have a finite number of accounts and finite number of audience, and you can get all those 500 leads or 1,000 leads over a period of a quarter, 2 quarters, or 3 quarters. What are you going to do after that? What's your strategy? So, lead acquisition just doesn't make sense over there. What makes sense is you keep educating your prospect, keep them engaged, keep them interested in you, so that when they are in the buying cycle, they 80% of the time they buy from the known brand. So we should actually focus on that. Hence, I said engagement is a better metric versus lead. Like if you're a traditional business, let me quote an example here. A B2C business, like a bank, for example, which wants to sell loans, right? Volume makes sense. Your audience is 350 million people, right? So, you can go and sell to anybody, right? So anybody who has a certain level of income has qualified for loan. So that versus this is so different. So their lead is a qualifying criteria. With B2B marketing in an ABM strategy, lead cannot be a measuring metric. So it's always good to have a lead, but it cannot be a measuring metric. In fact, if you get a lead through a channel which is educated, more engaged, you'll have better conversation with them throughout your sales cycle.
Do you think that like leaders, not just, CMOs, but just leaders across the executive team within B2B industries? Because I definitely agree with you. B2C, you can sell to the world. Sometimes you can sell to the whole world. And so your audience is large. You are less concerned about finding the right buyer because everybody is your buyer potentially. So with that mindset within B2B companies, do you think that leadership understands this shift or this potential shift in how we might want to do business to do better business? And if they don't, or if we've got listeners who are working with a team that's maybe just starting to evaluate these strategies or thinking through like what is the right go-to-market for them, how can we help, or what advice do you have to help B2B marketers shift their focus to prioritize engagements over like lead generation, lead capture, and kind of those more traditional marketing strategies?
I think the education starts at the top, right? I mean, if you have a demand gen leader in a company, which in a B2B company which has an ABM strategy, and they only measure lead goals, then there's some problem with it. But it goes beyond that, right? So it starts right at the CEO, CMO level, where the companies need to understand what their GTM strategy is, and not just depend on their managerial and director team or marketing team in general to make those decisions for them, because they're not the experts of your overall universe, right? They may be GTM expert for your product, but there are so many moving parts to the business, whether it is finance, sales, operations, delivery, engineering, software, logistics. There is a number of moving parts, right? And then you need to have a very holistic view to actually look at the strategy. And you obviously have to learn from the past, like what worked better for you, right? So if you have an infinite universe, you can have a gumball machines, shooting everything that comes in the way. But and typically in a B2B industry, that would not be the case. And a lot of the software vendors today are very purpose built, and they're solving unique problems. So, and more than identifying the ICP, they know what the ICP is. Within their ICP, they also need to find specific tech install base. Like, for example, say you built an AI agent which only works with say HubSpot CRM in this case, right? You can only work with companies that have HubSpot CRM, and you can pray that HubSpot doesn't build their own AI, right? So so you need to understand what your ICP is, and within your ICP, your ABM list or your target list, and then you have to build. So again, it needs to come from the top, and then everybody needs to support a strategy that is built by the entire team, and it just cannot be one person. I believe that most of the leaders understand this, and that's what I see in we support more than 200 software vendors globally, and I see that maturity with all the CMOs that I interact with. Unfortunately, CMO's life or tenure today is so limited. Like an average CMO survives, if it's not a co-founder CMO, survives only for average 18 months in a company today. It's because they get a 12-month period to prove themselves, and then now 6 months to hand over and get out. And the problem there is understanding that, okay, ultimately everybody wants dollars, ROI, right? So focusing on ROI is more important than leads and number of leads, or how many meetings we had, how many demos we had. It's if you're hitting your numbers, if you're hitting your ROI goals, I don't think so any of that would matter to anybody. But when you're not hitting your ROI goals, everybody goes back to activities. So so it's a cycle there. And but then yes, at least in the software development world where I belong, I think the general understanding is there, how they have to spend. I think what is important is partnering with the right agencies. Bring ton of value to you because they work with multiple different vendors or software vendors, I'm using software vendor as an example because that's my world, but they work with some different software vendors and understand different GTM strategies, and they also know what's working, what's not working, right? And they have the expertise and expertise to bring efficiency to your whole marketing ecosystem. But you need a right partner for that. And then again, you need to have redundancy and not rely on one agency partner. You need to have multiple agency partners with different expertise. Like discussion that we're having today, we need to take a step back and talk about brand gen today, right? So, so demand creation and demand generation is all part of demand gen, right? But we also need to talk about brand gen. My ask to you is, and I'm going to simplify this to you. So let's say I was an SDR who made a cold call to you, Rita, and asked, "Hey, Rita, can I get some time from you? Here's what I do." So you like what I said, what I do, right? And then I send you an email, and then you're supposed to book a meeting with me. What do you do the first instance you get that email? You first go to my website and do a social proof on my social media, etc. So if my brand is not impressive enough to you, you probably wouldn't want to engage, right? So building brand is so important before you get to demand generation also. So brand gen, I think it's a new term coined by a few agencies and it's being used widely today. But I think focusing on brand gen is more important than just focusing on demand gen. And then again, there's a holistic view that you need to have, and then every team needs to be tied in with a strategy. And then there are, as I said, moving parts are there. So you provide that information, intelligence to the teams to build the right strategy for you.
It's a very interesting way to think about things because I think in many ways we've been doing these things, but we structure it in our minds and in our programs and in the way we deliver results a little bit differently than the way we're talking about it today. And I want to tie in what you've been saying about brand gen to something you mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, and also for our final question. You started off, talking about the 95-5 rule, which tells us that, as a reminder, 95% of buyers are not actively in the market, but they're still qualified. And so that's where the brand gen piece comes in, and where, we want to make sure that we're activating those types of programs that may not see results right now, but will have that bigger impact later. So what can, our audience, B2B marketers, do to educate and engage this audience effectively to use brand gen strategies so that these qualified buyers are not only ready to buy with them later, but remember them?
Well, that's a good question, and I have a very difficult answer to this. And a lot of marketers are not going to like it. So first of all, I want to start with an example. So while we are food from our own restaurant, you would say, because we have to do it for ourselves too, right? So
right.
we have to do it for ourselves, right? So so that we can, we can grow our business, we, become more aware. There's more brand awareness about us, etc. So this I'm talking about not on search engine, but a prospect interacted with us recently, and I hope that person sees this. I can't name the person, but sees this podcast, but interacted with us recently. And then the interaction we had with him was his inquiry that came in said that he searched for B2B demand gen agencies in the US on Perplexity. Yeah, that's Perplexity. A bunch of names, but he inquired with us is because he at least he was aware of our brand. So this is going beyond search engine, right? So we're talking about AI searches, right? So we're talking about generative AI search, because OpenAI or Perplexity or any others that are being built today, large language models, they are going to be taking a fair share of search engine traffic there, right? So, but I think that's, since we're on that topic, I think it's not going to replace search engines, because search engine will always remain free. These guys will have to start charging money. So as they become premium, it'll become difficult for them to start capturing the market. But coming back to brand gen, right? So this was a good example, right? So you have to constantly work on educating your prospect, right? And then here's the problem. The number one problem marketers have is that they think they know the answers, you know.
Mm.
So they think they know the answer to everything. So if you tell them that, hey, this is what I need to do. So, from my experience, XYZ, this is the strategy that we're going to use, execute this, we'll use this agency, that agency, blah, 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 done. But what they forget is how often their market demographic change, right? Every year you have a younger person coming into the buying seat with a different mindset. And so constantly understanding your market, using maybe an analyst firm, or using your own firm, you are running some survey or creating a community and asking questions to that community. I think that makes sense because first of all, you need to know what they want. That changes everything. That just changes everything, right? I mean, maybe you're a bakery who wants to bake a cake, but they want bread. So it's just this just doesn't work out. So I think every marketer needs to take a step back, understand first what their audience want, and there should be a constant review mechanism. And I can say this is because you being a demand gen leader and on the customer side, I ask you many times, at least for few times a year, like, what do you think about this, right? And
Yep.
yeah, because I want to have a custom, want to have my customers' view, right? So that is very important when you are building solution, and then that ties into your brand positioning, your the messaging that you're building, and then the creatives around that, and then from the creatives you have these assets, etc., that you create, and then you have a full blown GTM strategy after that. And then again, you could use a 360 activation strategy, try all the channels, or you could simply focus on what has worked for you in the past. And as long as you have data to support what has worked for you in the past, I think that's the best way to go. If it's a do or die situation.
Yes, absolutely. Ram, as always, it is a pleasure. It's so much fun. It's so educational for me and our audience. Thank you so much for joining us today. And for our audience members, don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you stay on top of all of the updates and latest podcasts we have coming. Thank you.